One of the LS&M's early ventures was in the sugar trade and the building of a dock just down the Somerset coast from Portishead. The original line was designed to compete with the GWR in transporting the sugar to a West Country refinery. The refinery was never built, however, and many of the workforce, specially recruited from the ships sailing from Barbados, were put to work elsewhere. One of these was Vincent Fisher's grandfather, who was inordinately proud of his work on the LS&M, despite the company never paying him a great deal of attention or wages for his efforts. His devotion and loyalty to the company was passed down through the family to his grandson, who had worked his way up to being a porter on the station of a small West Country town in Wiltshire, or Berkshire, or Oxfordshire, somewhere like that. Commitment to the LS&M had been drummed into Vincent from birth, and he was determined to make something of himself. Accordingly, he set out to be the very best porter that could be imagined. Deliveries were made from the station to the surrounding area by an ancient horse and rickety cart, and Vincent saw that he could improve the delivery of small goods by carrying them himself. He carried everything, from boxes and baskets to local households, cast iron gates to suburban villas, day-old chicks to outlying small holdings, kitchenware to the local ironmongers. He carried it all, and he ran. He pounded through the streets and lanes, beating the delivery wagon by hours sometimes. For once, and probably the only time in its history, the LS&M provided a swift and efficient service that was appreciated and commented on throughout the town. The feats of strength and speed of Vincent, the magnificent Fisher, began to spread beyond the town and found their way to the boardroom of the company in London. The Evening Challenger, a scurrilous publication, had been berating the LS&M for its poor efficiency over the past few months, and here the board saw an opportunity to get one over on that paper. Accordingly, the chairman took the editor of the Daily Dasher out to dinner at his favourite chop house. The editor of the Dasher couldn't see much mileage in a story about a railway porter until, after a few whisky and sodas, the chairman blurted out that the magnificent Fisher was so fast he could outrun a train. Well, the editor seized on this. Could a competition be organised, he wondered, pouring himself a generous measure of 15-year-old malt, paid for by the railway company. Magnificent Fisher against a train. Over, say, a mile? Now, that would make a story the Dasher could promote. It would make the LS&M the employer of the fastest man on earth. Unhesitatingly and unthinkingly, the chairman agreed, and the competition was duly announced on the front page of the Dasher. What an event! There would be marquees, a brass band, a whole panoply of stalls and sideshows. The whole event was fixed for a Saturday in early June. The Dasher started carrying regular features and stories about the coming trial of strength, and it was they who coined his title, The Magnificent Fisher. The board patted themselves on the back. What could go wrong? Except that this was the LS&M. Vincent was given time off to train, unpaid of course, and was even supplied with a ration of good British beef to build up his muscles, at a very reasonable cost. Excited by the furor whipped up by the dasher, the whole town where he worked would turn out to cheer him on as he pounded up and down the high street, carrying unimaginably heavy sacks of corn or coal or lumps of pig iron. The pride Vincent felt was matched by the whole town, and Vincent, the magnificent Fisher, felt that this was a vindication for the years of drudgery and toil suffered by generations of his family. And then, the weekend before the great event, the Evening Challenger printed a front-page splash that called the LS&M the worst railway company in the world.
Railway company worst in the world.
Added to a litany of its failings and mismanagements, the Challenger now pointed out in banner headlines that the LS&M was about to prove its inadequacies to the world itself by having one of its decrepit ramshackle engines beaten by someone jogging along beside it on foot. They went in hard.
Worst in the world.
A hastily convened board meeting on Monday descended into the usual acrimony and name-calling, until someone came up with an idea to head off disaster. Vincent, the magnificent Fisher, must be ordered to lose the race. It seemed the obvious solution. He was an employee of the company, and he would do whatever he was told to do. But when the regional manager turned up at Vincent's station wearing his official bowler hat and revealed the plan to Vincent, he was greeted with a look of shock and bewilderment so acute that he thought the towering athlete might be about to suffer from an apoplectic seizure. And here he made a series of tactical blunders that were guaranteed to seal the failure of his mission. He opened the valise he was carrying and produced a small bundle of banknotes. Vincent looked aghast. Taking his wide-eyed silence as a demand for a larger bribe, the manager took out another and another and another wad of notes. Eventually, Vincent managed to blurt out a few words. No, sir, I cannot do that. I will not do that. I am a man of honour. If I run with all my strength that the Creator has endowed me with. Well, yes, we want you to run. You must, but... And here the regional manager began to panic and compounded his mistake by drawing from the valise a bottle of fine malt whisky. Vincent's expression turned from astonishment to horror, and then anger. I have been properly brought up in the Methodist tradition. I have never, will never, and the regional manager considered it expedient to leave the station on the very next train without further ado. But Vincent was sore troubled. Here was a three-way tug on his conscience: family, religion, and his undoubted loyalty to the company, even though it had just so sorely abused him. But Vincent, the magnificent Fisher, was not only a man of great physical strength, but he also possessed a great deal of wisdom, and he understood that he had been thrust into the situation by his own doing, and by his own doing he must find a way of solving it. The day of the great race dawned, to scudding dark clouds and a fine drizzle that meant that the crowds were not as great as might be expected or feared. The journalists and reporters made for the finish line at the end of the measured mile, stopping at the various beer tents on the way. The engine had been thoroughly prepared by the cleaners and looked as magnificent as an LS&M engine could do, with its brasswork gleaming dully through the murk. A rake of multicoloured carriages carrying the board members and their wives completed the ensemble. Vincent, having walked along the cinder track that had been laid alongside the straight mile of railway line, took up his place at the starting point, where he bent, as if he was having some trouble with his shoelace. At that moment the cannon thundered and the engine, whistle blaring, set off down the track. Vincent, and apparently realising the train was already some yards ahead, set off in pursuit. But the wheels of the engine were desperately searching for grip on the slippery rails. The driver was good, he backed off the regulator, and the fireman put down copious amounts of sand, and the engine started to make progress. But Vincent was catching up fast, and with the wheels slipping and screeching in protest, he raced alongside. But now the engine was accelerating, and Vincent was going at a prodigious rate. He was straining every nerve and fibre. He was clearly not backing down. He seemed to be overhauling the engine when, with only a few yards to go, he suddenly dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. Was he praying for inspiration? No! It looked as though he was tying his recalcitrant shoelace. At that moment the engine was at his shoulder, and the last 10 yards were covered in a flurry of flailing limbs as he flung himself at the finishing line. Vincent returned to work the next day, and the press hardly covered what turned out to be a bit of a damp squib. Had Vincent won? Had he deliberately allowed the engine to win? Had fate or God intervened by untying his shoelace? If anyone asked what the outcome really had been, Vincent answered with a sort of enigmatic smile and would not be drawn. He continued to preserve the honour of his family by his work. He continued to serve his church and community with dedication, and eventually rose to be station master at that very station. It is sometimes thought that had the board recruited his sort of dedication and wisdom to the upper echelons of the company, they might have prospered more than they did. Thank you for listening to that 10-minute tale. There will be another one along very soon.